Leadership at its core is action, right? And under that is performance, which is willingness and ability. I saw a lot of people who wanted to lead others, but they didn't necessarily lead themselves good. So if you're not leading yourself effectively, then you're not leading others effectively. It's impossible.
Bobby Harrington is the founder of the Rubicon Course of Action Immersive Leadership Development Company, which specializes in performance programs and immersive leadership development events. Bobby has practiced leadership in sports, martial arts, the military, private business, and a Fortune 100 oil and gas company. He has taught leadership in 24 different countries with 13 different languages. Bobby is a U.S. Marine Corps, Desert Shield, and Desert Storm Gulf War veteran, and he currently lives in Texas with his wife and family. When it comes to leadership, and when we have experts on the show to speak on leadership, we don't like to simply have people who have read about it and then regurgitated what they've read. We love to have people from all the different walks of life to come on here and share not just rhetoric for leadership, but stories and experiences that they've lived when it comes to leadership. And Bobby literally checks all of those boxes. So I hope that you're ready for a fun conversation. When you take away even just one thing from this conversation with Bobby, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You're the reason that the Be Better broadcast has grown the way that it has over the past 2 years to 300 episodes, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. So without further ado, let's talk to the man himself, Mr. Bobby Harrington, all the way from Texas. It's great to have you on the show, Bobby.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. Thanks for that introduction. Extremely grateful to be here.
Absolutely. So you are owed several congratulations in this conversation. The first one is congratulations on the big one. Well, both are big, but the first one is you just retired 2 months ago from a long career in the oil and gas company, 3 decades of it. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you. It's been a long road, been fruitful, but long, and ready for the next phase of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me, coming from a perspective of leadership, what's it like retiring after 3 decades of essentially having an identity that is centered around this idea of you being a leader in this industry?
Yeah, the leadership journey is long, but at the end of the day, it felt like a Sunday afternoon. Truly, 3 decades, and it's over like that. And the last couple of months, I've really been reflecting on every fork in the road, in my leadership journey, especially since I'm continuing to teach leadership and going to run these leadership events. I'm just pulling up all those experiences and anecdotes, and I'm ready to share those with anyone who's willing to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. What drives you, before I congratulate you for the second thing here, what drives you to continue moving forward in this journey of yours when it comes to facilitating trainings and speaking on leadership? A lot of people I know, and someone we actually had on the show recently, I talked to him after the show and I said, so what's next after this? And he said, when I'm retired, I'm not doing any of this anymore. And it actually kind of surprised me. This was coming from this person who I expected who'd be very similar to you. They'd keep moving. And I'm 29, but I'd like to envision that when I am in my 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, and at this point with technology, I'll probably be living to 150. I like to think that I'll still be doing something fun and helpful and educative, such as this platform. So what drives you to keep moving forward even after retiring, which many believe that retiring means stopping?
Right. So, the main driver is there's a deficit of leadership everywhere. You can look around the last couple of years of COVID and so on and so forth, and even in government, you can see it. And, we can reach, 1 person, 10 people, 100 people, that multiplies, right? And I guess number 2, it's really fulfilling, to take someone who's, young or has the willingness to learn and mold them into a leader, or give them a positive framework to start their leadership journey. That's what pretty much drives me. I do wake up every day wondering, how can I be a better leader? How can I get just a little bit better? Because as leaders, we're never done. And that's part of the challenge too. Even after 34 years, 4 years in the military and 30 years in oil and gas, I'm not a finished product, right? and I work
Yeah.
on that every day. So those are the two main drivers.
Oh, I love it. Great points. I've got some follow-ups on that too, but I'd like to congratulate you for your second giant achievement in this chapter of your life, which is the release of your first book, which is Lead You, the winning combination to achieve personal and professional success. And for those watching the podcast, you can look on Bobby's shelf to the left of him, or the right of him, but the left for us. And you see the beautiful cover work, and you can clearly see Lead You. So first of all, congratulations on the launch of your book, sir. Very exciting.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
And let me ask you, why are those two words, giant and bold, on the cover of that book? Why is Lead You the two focal point words on that book? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, when I was doing my research for the book, the first place I went was Amazon, and there were 60,000 titles of leadership on Amazon. That coupled with the fact that along my 34-year journey, I saw a lot of people who wanted to lead others, but they didn't necessarily lead themselves good. So if you're not leading yourself effectively, then you're not leading others effectively. It's impossible. Thirdly, or lastly, I like to work problems from the inside out. Start with the cause and not the symptom. And the cause of poor leadership is it always goes back to self, right? You can look at people who have setbacks, which I've had setbacks myself along the way. And, when I really analyzed it, it was me that couldn't get out of my own way. I had to lead myself better, even with all the leadership training and experience I had. So, this is one book in a set of three. The next book is Leading Teams, and I'm going to finish out with Leading Through Change. So I think people sleep on leading through change, which is really important for organizations because, in business, everything today has become disruptive. And so what does that mean? That means that there's a lot of change.
Yes. Well said. I love the three-part series there, and I feel like all three of them will go very well into each other. You mentioned that you discovered at a certain point in your career the importance of leading yourself. Was that already when you were considered the title of leader? Like, when in your leadership career did you realize that leading yourself was the most important piece of the entire equation?
Well, the first inkling I got was when I played football. And I played football from 7 years old to 19, 1 year in college, and unfortunately I washed out. But the very specific moment I learned that we have to lead ourselves first is, during boot camp, you're taught leadership training. And in Marine boot camp, they teach leadership a certain way. And the very first thing you learn are character traits. And that's totally down to the individual. And you not only learn it in boot camp, you're expected to perform to that standard or those leadership traits for your whole tour of duty, right? So it becomes a way of living, right?
Are those leadership traits universal, or are they tailored to the individual during that time in boot camp?
They're universal. Yeah. Everyone expected to work to the same character traits. And there's an acronym out there. It's called JJ, Did, Tie, Buckle. And I'll just rattle off a few of them.
Please.
Justice, judgment, dependability, initiative, decisiveness, bearing, unselfishness, courage, knowledge, enthusiasm, and on down the line.
And do they go in that order specifically?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a framework. Like I mentioned in the book, it's a very particular framework, and it works. And if you look at the success of the Marine Corps, over 200 years and never lost a battle. Of course, the Marines retreated at some point at points, but never lost a battle. And it goes back to one thing, and it's leadership.
How do they help you to embody those character traits, especially as a young man going into the Marines? How do they help you to understand that these aren't just words or an acronym, but something to live by, especially in the event that you could be facing life or death? Like, how do they get you to embody justice and courage and knowledge, and what goes into that?
Well, that's an awesome question. So first of all, you get direct feedback. And second of all, you're put into situations where you have to use these traits. And that could be training, it could be an operation, Outside of boot camp, you go into the Fleet Marine Corps, and you go to, it's kind of like in business, you go to a different business unit, right? So, my first duty station was Okinawa. So that's where I went. And we went to the Philippines for 6 months from Okinawa. And the first school they sent me to was jungle environment survival training. So, 5 days in the jungle, no food, so on and so forth. And, definitely your resilience and courage and stuff like that, your decisiveness, your bearing. It's easy to get hot and get frustrated, but, you're expected to keep your bearing. So it's going through those situations. And then, finally you see the result, right? When a mission is accomplished, you're like, oh, okay, this actually works. There's a reason, for the last year, I've had to learn these things and go through these hardships. And it's no different, working in the civilian world. Sometimes it's a little less organized, but you do go through different kinds of hardships, in business. And when you come out of the other side, or you fulfill an aggressive financial business plan, you see the results, and then you'll say, okay, well, yeah, that's why they want us to do it. It works.
Absolutely. So a combination of direct feedback along with being put in situations where you must practice these different principles.
Absolutely. And, feedback is omnipresent from your peers, from your superiors, and even, subordinates, because everyone's on the same team.
When you're working with a leader and they oversee, let's say, even other leaders, so maybe now we're speaking to, a higher level executive or decision maker, how often, because we're all familiar with the quarterly review. And as a leader, when I was at the higher levels of leadership in the company that I worked with for a decade myself, when I was 18, I started there. I looked forward to my quarterly reviews because I'm very much someone who is pretty self-managed. However, I always liked to know, what are you seeing when it comes to my performance as a leader and in terms of the execution of these different things that I'm working on? And they used to always give me at least one thing that I can work on. And one of my goals was, I'm going to work on that one thing so I can impress them, because I like the recognition, but also to keep improving my game. And for me, though, it got to a point where I was so self-managed and I was in such an isolated position that I only had that conversation with them once a quarter. How often would you say is it important to be checking in with those people that report to you to help them to embody these principles?
Well, definitely it all starts with a standard, right, for everyone, then expectations, and then for, the scene. So if you have a span of control of, say, an executive, you have a span of control of 5 or 6, first thing you should do is always keep rapport and communication with everyone. And, as far as giving feedback, it should always be given with the intent and tone to improve people. Now, as for the timing, I believe it should be as appropriate to the individual. It's individuals are on a spectrum, right? So on a 100% scale, you've usually got your 15% of highly effective and performing people. You've got the middle, and then you've got the 10%, at the bottom. And that's just a curve. Some people take more feedback than others, right? And feedback in a different way. And that goes back to, that all goes back to influence. And, people think influence is this magic thing. Well, it's not. The thing about influence is you have to understand people, and that's spending personal time with them, getting to know them, what drives them personally and professionally, and knowing about their culture, their background.
When you are traveling to different countries and you're working with different cultures, and you also consider how leadership operates in the military and how it operates in the civilian world, what changes when you're traversing these different cultures, countries, archetypes in terms of military, civilian, or is leadership the same throughout?
Well, leadership at its core is action, right? And under that is performance, which is willingness and ability. There are some cultural norms that are different. For instance, my last assignment in Chevron, the company I retired from, was in Nigeria. It's a very hierarchical type of society, right? Whereas in the U.S., the buzzword here is work horizontally, right? Where, we try not to have so much hierarchy and see the team as a collective. Although most organizations organize vertically, they ask us to work horizontally, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. And so while leadership might be the same, it's structured in different ways based on where you are, the culture, the company, the style.
It is, and the modes of communication are different throughout these countries, especially giving feedback. Feedback in some countries has to be given a certain way. It's just the way it is, the culture. And, the idea is to acclimate and adapt to that culture, right? Because they don't want to be Western. They have their own culture, right? And that's where usually leaders get into the pitfall of, they take their, Western mind and Western leadership style and go to these countries, and it's like putting a square in a circle.
Yeah. Was it difficult to adjust to those different ways when you're going from country to country and from team to team? Like, how do you learn and quickly adjust?
Well, in Chevron, we're fortunate we had intercultural orientation, right? So we learn some norms, before you get there, but it can be pretty perilous for the first 3 to 6 months, because you're going to make mistakes. You can't know it all.
How do you recover from those mistakes? Like, especially if you make a big mistake, maybe it's a cultural mistake, maybe it was a lapse in judgment. The reason I ask is I had an interesting conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch, who is an incredible human being. He was on the show talking about leadership, and he said that when it comes to integrity, he believes that you can practically come back from anything. How do you come back from making those mistakes?
Yeah, just make an honest and transparent and genuine apology and commit not to do it again. And hold yourself accountable to not do it again. Because, I think you're right. Everyone can be forgiven once, but in some of these cultures, twice and pretty much you're done.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you don't learn from it the first time, then how can you be expected to come back and apologize again for something similar that you already did? People just aren't going to take you at face value.
Sure. It just erodes trust.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, let's jump to the heart of your book. And again, for those who are watching, you can see it on the shelf there next to Bobby. It is named Lead You, the Winning Combination to Achieve Personal and Professional Success. So who was this written for? When did you start writing this? Because you just retired 2 months ago, and I'm assuming you didn't finish the book in 2 months. If you did, I'm very impressed. When did you start writing it, and who was it for?
It took about 12 months to write the book, 6 to 7 months of actual writing. I wrote it on planes. I wrote it during lunch. I wrote it in the bathroom. I wrote it at night in bed, at my desk. I was flying back and forth to Nigeria and, activities when I'm at home. So, but the thing about it was you just write 3,400 words a day. So the writing took about 7 months, and then the editing and so on and so forth, another 5.
And who was it written for? What inspired you? Because I'm sure in your mind, and I'm assuming here that you're saying to yourself, I'm about to retire from this long career. I want to continue helping other people who are walking the same path that I walked, maybe a little bit different. What prompted the beginning? Because especially for your first book, this is something that was totally alien to you. And who did you have in mind as you wrote the book?
Yeah, this book is for young leaders who have never been introduced to leadership, say someone who's just getting out of college, or maybe someone who's worked in a company for 3 to 4 years. They've just been elevated into a leadership position, right? Still, that intimates that they're in charge of other people or accountable for other people or privileged to lead other people, but still they have to go back to leading themselves, right? And that's is having the conversation of, where am I at? What do I need to work on? What kind of character traits am I working on? What are my values? How do I cultivate trust, right? Because self-trust is the precursor to self-belief, right? And I want to give those people, it took me about 30 years to learn all this, and I just want to scale that time down for them. Secondly, it's for people who have had setbacks, and I had one of my own. And when it came down to it, I needed to do better with my character and my values and so on and so forth. I wasn't doing horrible, But the idea, if you're going to do something, is to do it all the way and do it great, not 85% or 90% to, to exceed.
What was your setback, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah. I'd worked in Chevron for, I think it was about 10 years at that time. And I had a career best and received a company award, a chairman's award for doing this great thing. And got to go meet the CEO, and he gave me a little bit of money. Got to pick my next assignment, and when I got to that next assignment, I realized that I was burned out. My relationships weren't well. I had money, but I didn't have a financial plan. My belief system wasn't where it needed to be, and physically, after working on application development for this certain technology for 7.5 years, I kind of let myself go physically. So I had to look at my family situation, my beliefs, my financial situation. And, at first I didn't really know what was happening, right? Because I just had this big success. And I think this goes back to big successes often mask flaws, right? There can be problems underneath. And that's not me saying that. I got that from the CEO of Starbucks, and I watched his master class, and I thought that was pretty profound. So I started to have this internal conversation, and I read the book at the same time I was reading the book Lone Survivor, about Marks of the Trail and Operation Red Wings, and the theme there was never quit and give your best, and that's what I came back to. That I was doing good, but I wasn't doing my absolute best, right? And again, the point of doing anything is to do your absolute best, the best you can. So in all that, the feedback I got for myself when I had that internal conversation was a course of action, a plan to improve. So for the last 8 years, I've been on that improvement journey, and all those aspects of my life has got exponentially better. My family life's never been better. I made a financial plan. I was able to retire, learned how to invest. I'm in great shape physically, and my belief system is where it needs to be.
Hell yeah, brother. What an inspiring story that is.
No, and I wanted to share that with people because I know that there's someone out there that's feeling exactly like I felt. And, I want them to have my book to lean on to maybe take one thing from it, right? Just like you said in the podcast, take one thing. And that's what gave me the impetus to start this, executive coaching and leadership consulting and the live immersive events, because that's where the magic happens, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because you and I, we have a lot of similar threads as to why we do what we do, yet very different in how we've come about that. Like, as an example, I was 21 years old, so this is 8 years ago, and I was doing financially well at the sales company that I was in, but I was also lacking in the physical realm. I was 60 pounds heavier than I am now. I was unhappy. I didn't even want to leave the house to go anywhere because I didn't want people in my hometown to see me, because they'd be like, "Whoa, is that Brandon Eastman? Like, look at him now. He's a pretty big dude driving a nice car, but pretty big dude." And it got to the point where my leader at the time, this is before I entered into leadership, he gave me some harsh words. And he said, "Brandon, you told me that you want to be a leader here. How can you lead other people if you can't even lead yourself, if you can't even respect yourself?" And it was hard for me to hear that. And I actually wanted to leave the company when I heard those words.
Oh, sure.
And it took a few weeks, and I finally said, "Okay, what do I need to do?" And he gave me a book, and that book was The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. And he said, "This book changed my life, and I think you should read it." And I thought it was cheesy at first when I first read it, but I decided I really have no other choice here, and I decided to move forward. And that's ultimately, over the course of 8 years, an entire journey here so far, and we're just at the beginning, that I decided to start the podcast and the business and write my book in 2019, all about self-mastery. So it's very interesting how all these principles come back to working on you before you can then go out there and lead and work on others.
It does. And I like to pull that thread about, you said it felt corny. When I was having that internal conversation, like within myself, I felt disingenuous and funky and everything. But when I opened my heart and my mind, it started to make sense. And that's what drove the sense of honesty to make that course of action to improve. And I think that's where we need to get people to that, when they get feedback or they have the internal conversation, it's not going to feel, it's going to feel bad. It's not going to feel good, because the truth hurts. Often the truth hurts, but that's a good thing. The perspective to take is, okay, let me take this information and this is where I need to improve. Now, how do I do this? What resources do I need? And have the discipline, to do it.
Well said. Now, I noticed that on your shelf, you've got your book, of course, but the one right behind it, I was looking at the last few letters, and you mentioned a book called Lone Survivor, and it looks like that book right behind yours is Lone Survivor, which is funny.
It
you
is.
mentioned it. Okay, cool. Yeah. Is that has that book been pretty influential in your journey? Is that the book that you read that helped you on that new path? Like, what did you take from that book specifically? Just curiously asking.
Yeah, no, well, you'll read about it in chapter 1 in my book. I was sitting on the edge of my bed in Nigeria, sobbing and, asking myself, Christ's sake, how did I get here? And at the same time, I was reading this book, Lone Survivor, and just the story of, falling down a hill in the mountain 3 times, losing a weapon and still going. I mean, going until there was nothing left, right? So if a person can go do that, if a person can go do all that, all of us can certainly get our shit together, right? I mean, come on, and that was, that was what made things snap in my mind.
Does it ever make sense to give up, to stop?
Well, okay, I'll make this correlation.
Yeah.
In war, there's a time to retreat. Okay, there's a time to retreat. But if you want something and it's within your reach and you have the willingness and the ability, the willingness, I want to do this, I have the desire, and the ability, I've acquired skills, there is no excuse to give up. There's absolutely no excuse. The only reason you'd be giving up is because, you quit. You lost desire when it got hard. And that's usually what happens is when things get hard, folks, tend to quit. Your desire gets tested in any big, endeavor.
Yeah. And that idea of retreating isn't giving up. That idea of retreating is you back off and you replan, you reapproach the situation from a different angle. So you're still going. It's just that for this battle, you step back and you reassess where you are and what's next.
Absolutely. And, people have retreated for a millennia. The old saying, right, this is not a hill to die on.
Yeah. Love that. Very cool.
Yeah.
I felt I should ask you that because I've talked to a lot of people about that. So let's talk to the young man and the young women out there who are entering the world of leadership. And maybe they were just bestowed the title of manager, bestowed the title of team leader, whatever it might be. And you are their mentor. So they call you in, hey, Bobby Harrington's here to help you learn how to be a leader. Where do you start with these individuals? How do you take your vast experience and compress it into a time frame to help give them those principles that you've learned?
Sure. Yeah. So the first thing we do is we talk about self. We'll talk again, I'll double down. We'll go back to character, right? Those character traits. And I added 2 in my book, added accountability and compassion, because, compassion is really the highest form of leadership. So we start with character traits, then we move into values. And, as values will change throughout your life. When you're young, you might be ambitious. When you're older, like me, a few years prior to retirement, financials became a value for me. Hard work, right? Hard work is a value for me that, I was taught in my household, and, it carried me, through life. But understanding values and what is important to you, right, for the next 5 years is critical. And then the ability to be sovereign, or the willingness to be sovereign as a leader and not waver in your values. That really is a difference maker, because there's been studies, across industry, construction, aerospace, oil and gas, only 10% of leaders are willing to stay sovereign on their own values and the values of the company. Right. So that, it's not a good statistic. And you see it. You see it every day in the news and what you read. But I tell people if they want to differentiate themselves, work on your character, live your values. It's that simple. It's not easy, but it really is that simple. And there's a cost. There's always a cost for staying true to your values, and that's fine. But I think in the end of the day, you'll gain more, right? It might be addition by subtraction, because you'll lose opportunities, you'll lose friends, you lose business opportunities, but that's okay. If it doesn't match your values, it's not for you. It's kind of my mantra.
If it doesn't match your values, it's not for you.
No.
I love that. So how do you keep yourself, and again, as a military man, I'm sure that this may be more ingrained in you than someone who grows up in a corporate world. So how does one who this wasn't yelled into them, screamed into them, drilled into them, stay reminded of their core values? How do you help the people that you work with and coach to be reminded of those values? Because as I'm sure one of those examples of someone not staying sovereign to the values of their organization and of themselves, I would say would be the CEO of Budweiser. And with the whole Bud Light fiasco, with the Dylan Mulvaney thing, are you familiar with that at all?
I've seen a little bit of it. It's
okay.
quite comical.
And you don't really need to know too much about it to know that the CEO came out and said, this was a mistake solely on our chief marketing officer. They have been let go from their role, and we will do better moving forward. And that first part there tells me that this individual is not taking ownership of that situation.
Yeah. Okay, so if I'm the board, I'm going to fire him right away. I'll fire that dude right away, because that doesn't speak of anything that's leadership. Especially as a CEO, I mean, we're accountable. The buck stops with us.
Yeah.
I just wrote a post on LinkedIn a couple of days ago, people lamenting the mantle of leadership. It's like, come on, you have to look at it in the reverse way. It's a privilege. And like you're experiencing exponential growth. You don't believe it, because you're alone and at the top, but you're growing. But no, that's totally inexcusable and not appropriate to point out a subordinate. Stop it.
Yeah. So when that individual writes that message, I'm sure he put a lot of time before he hit the send button. So if you were there with him at that point, you'd obviously say, hey, do not hit that send button. We've got to really go back to the drawing board here. How do you help people stay accountable to their values and their character traits that they wrote down at the beginning?
Sure. So, for me, it starts with an assessment, and, man, there's all kind of assessments out there, Profile XT, 360 feedback, all that. And I have a different type of assessment where we work through the character traits, and we actually sit down with values, and we write those down, we select those, and we keep it to 3 to 5, right? To keep it simple, because what do people like? People like predictability and simple. If it's simple, people can work to it. So remembering 3 values or living 3 values is easier than trying to live, 200. I mean, there's hundreds of values out there, but you can only really live and be sovereign to probably 3 to 5. So, it's focusing on, what you've written down in your assessment, and, in your mind, when you come to a situation where your values are at odds, you have to learn to compartmentalize. Right? These are my values. This doesn't match. Okay, this has got to go over here. But those values are things you have to say to yourself every day. I'm going to live this way. And I recite mine every day. It's simplicity, hard work, family, believe in yourself, and treat others with respect. Those are my 5 values.
So why did you, so my follow-up to that, because there's a lot of values, and for those watching, I just want to throw this on my screen here. Like you said, there's hundreds. I just wanted to throw some on the screen. You have integrity, loyalty, courage, kindness, learning, humility, patience, beauty. Like, how do you choose only 3? Did you personally choose the ones that you lacked in? Did you choose the ones that sounded the best? Like, especially if you're keeping it to 3 or 5, how do you choose 3 or 5 out of a list of hundreds?
Yeah, good question. As I write in the book, it's what is important to you right now and for the next 3 to 5 years, right? So my family is critically important to me. They've been my only support system. My father was in World War II, Korea and Vietnam 3 times. And my mom was Yugoslavian, by descent. So she was a pretty hard person. So, in my house, hard work was, it's kind of the mantra again. So I carried that throughout my whole life. I love simple. Don't write emails more than 3 sentences. I don't have a lot of words to say. I try to say it simple, clear, and concise. The root of relationships is respect, right? And then believing in myself. Since I've built self-trust, right, over 30 years, I believe in myself. So I want to continue to believe in myself.
So how do those values practically help you on a day-to-day basis? Is it when you're making a decision? Is it when you're confronted with a challenge that you go back and you say, okay, is this simple? Is this, and then the other ones that you mentioned, like, how do you use that practically?
Yeah, just start with hard work. Again, if it's worth doing, work hard. And, there's a lot of folks that frown on working hard, but there's a lot of benefits from working hard. It builds character, it builds resilience. Mom used to make me plant flowers, vacuum the house. And, I used to watch her push mow a 2-acre yard, and, I'd be there helping her. She had it on the top and there's a little bar in the middle. I'd be, pushing with her. So now I've learned so much from hard work, and simplicity. Who doesn't like simple? And again, people will gravitate to things that are simple. Look at your car, look at, computer programs, even getting on this call. This platform is probably very complicated on the back end, but, to get in this call with you, I press 2 buttons, basically. So, that's kind of how I use them.
Okay, that's cool. So you mentioned earlier that there is a deficit of leadership out there, and you're doing your work now in order to help alleviate that deficit and create more strong leaders who have that value of working hard. Which, by the way, when did that value disappear? That it's mind blowing that the idea, and I know what you're talking about because you got the saying of work smarter, not harder. But if you go back to the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, and you tell a man to not work hard, you're going to be looked at with very strange eyes. And if we look at what created all the technologies and the groundbreaking evolution of everything we have today, it's because men and women worked hard back then to bring us to where we are now. They worked hard during difficult times in order to create strong men and good times. So that idea that hard work disappeared is mind-blowing, but it just goes to show that there is a deficit of leadership and these core values in today's world. So how can we, as young men and women, as leaders, help to alleviate this leadership deficit?
Well, it's setting the example, right? As a leader, it's a privilege to lead others, and people may not realize it when they're in a leadership position of leading people. People are constantly looking at you, the way you carry yourself, the way you work, the way you're willing to delegate, the way you communicate, and if I want someone else to work hard, well, then I got to work hard, right? And it goes back to, as a leader, I'm not going to ask anyone to do something that I wouldn't do or I haven't done, right? Because that would be, sort of disingenuous.
So rather than go out there and try to change the world by working on you and changing your own world first.
Absolutely. I mean, it might be kind of corny, but like, if you want change, be the change, right? Don't treat the symptom, treat the cause,
I love it. I think you've given us a lot of practical advice today, and advice that you've learned through your own experiences, not just something that you've read, something that you very much lived and still continue to live. So Bobby, I thank you for that. And I want to ask you, and I'm sure, everyone listening already knows where they can find it, but where can people find your book? Again, for those just listening, the name of Bobby's book is Lead You, The Winning Combination to Achieve Personal and Professional Success. So where can we find it?
Absolutely. So folks can go to Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, and it's on many outlets, but Amazon is the main marketplace for the book. And it just recently released on audiobook as well. And there's a special treat in there where I'm interviewed between chapters. So it gives the reader, or the listener rather, just a little bit more context and a few more anecdotes, about the subject material.
Oh, that's great. Who interviewed you for the audiobook?
Oh, this guy was awesome. His name is Shaman Casey.
Okay. Did you
Sounds like
know him,
James.
or it's someone that you were linked up with?
I selected him out of a pool of narrators, and he
Cool.
sort of sounds like James Earl Jones. So, yeah, no, it's awesome.
That is awesome. I love that style of audiobook because
Yeah.
David Goggins did that too. And when I read that, are you familiar with David Goggins?
Yes, yeah, I know him
Okay, and
from.
I
Yeah,
love that between chapters he was there back and forth. So I'm gonna definitely check out the audiobook. Having a brand new
awesome.
son, it's been hard to pick up and read, which I used to love doing. So I've been listening to a lot more. So I'm gonna pick that up, guys. There's links in the description to pick up your copy of Lead You: The Winning Combination to Achieve Personal and Professional Success. You can find it on Amazon, and I'll also include the social profiles for Bobby so you can reach out and connect with him as well. But, sir, this has been a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for making the time to share your wisdom on this show. And it was an absolute honor. Thank you very much, Bobby.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I really appreciate it.
Whether you are someone who's been a leader for a long time, or maybe you are a young man or young woman who is just entering this world of leadership, or you have an inspiration to enter this world of leadership, then I really hope that this conversation gave you some nuggets of knowledge, which is one of the core values that the military instills, that you can use in your own personal and your own professional life. For me, one of my biggest takeaways was right after this conversation, before the next one, I'm going to write down my 3 to 5 values from that list that I just looked up of hundreds of values. So it might take me more than the 13 minutes that I have, but I'm going to write those down and I'm going to put them as my phone wallpaper so that when I am making a decision or, have a difficult challenge in front of me, those values will help to lead me. So, Bobby, that was my main takeaway. Thank you for that, sir. And I hope you guys took something as well. If you did, please share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. You're the reason that we're not running ads, that we don't use sponsors, because we don't want to interrupt your viewing and listening experience, because we've grown just great by your help alone, because you are the best part of the Be Better team. Links are in the description to go grab Bobby's book, his audiobook, or head to Barnes & Noble and grab it there, as well as connect with him on social. And as always, thank you for watching and listening. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.